The barn had been there for as long as Claire Whitmore could remember, standing at the far edge of her family's land, like a quiet unspoken memory. When she was a child, she used to race past it on her bike, never daring to peek inside. It wasn't fear that kept her away, but something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way it leaned slightly to one side. Its red paint faded to the color of dried clay, or the way the wind seemed to whistle differently through its gaps, as if it carried secrets. Now, years later, Claire stood before it. Once again, she had returned to the farm after her grandmother's passing, the weight of decisions pressing on her shoulders, the land deed to be sold, the barns, sheds, and even the old farmhouse were all part of an inheritance she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she wanted. But there was something about this barn, something unspoken, that pulled at her. The August sun was warm on her back as she approached the creaking wooden doors. Cobwebs hung in delicate patterns, like forgotten lace, swaying gently in the summer breeze. With a push, the doors groaned open, the hinges protesting the movement after years of stillness. A rush of warm, dusty air wrapped around her like an old blanket, carrying with it the smell of hay, oil, and time itself. Inside, everything was bathed in soft, golden light. Sunbeams slipped through the cracks in the roof and walls, catching tiny motes of dust that danced slowly in the air. Rusted tools hung on nails, their handles worn smooth by hands long gone. In the far corner, under a sagging loft of hay, stood a weathered wooden trunk, its metal clasps dulled with age. Claire moved toward it, her footsteps muffled by the dirt-covered floor. The trunk was heavier than it looked, and when she pulled it open, she found nothing remarkable at first. Old quilts, a few chipped mason jars, and a stack of brittle newspapers from decades ago. She might have left it at that, if her hand hadn't brushed against something unusual. A small wooden crate, tucked beneath the quilts, almost hidden from sight. The crate was covered in a thin layer of dust, but when she wiped it away, she found it tied shut with frayed twine. The knot came loose with little effort, and inside, her breath caught. There, neatly stacked and bound together, was a bundle of yellowed envelopes. The paper was fragile, edges curled, but each one was perfectly preserved. They were tied together with a faded blue ribbon, the kind you might find in an old wedding bouquet. Claire's fingers trembled as she lifted the bundle, her eyes catching the writing on the front of the top envelope. "To my dearest." The ink had faded to a warm brown, and the handwriting, elegant, careful, yet tinged with emotion, was unlike anything she'd seen in years. She felt the barn around her fade into the background, the air growing still as though it too was waiting for her to read. She slipped the first letter free from its envelope, the paper crackling softly in her hands. The words inside were tender, almost poetic. "The orchard is quiet without you. I still hear your laughter when the wind moves through the leaves. The moon is almost full tonight. It reminds me of the night you said you'd wait for me, no matter how long it took." Claire's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a letter. It was a piece of someone's heart, preserved through decades. And the strangest thing was, she recognized the style of the cursive. She had seen it before, in her grandmother's recipe book. She looked down at the remaining stack of envelopes in her hands. Who had written them? And why were they hidden here in the barn, waiting for her to find them? Claire sat cross-legged on the barn's dusty floor, the sunlight pooling around her like a soft golden spotlight. The bundle of letters rested in her lap, each envelope whispering to be opened. She hesitated for a moment, feeling like an intruder in someone else's most intimate thoughts. But something inside her, a quiet pull she couldn't explain, urged her to keep reading. She opened the next envelope with careful fingers, the old paper almost sighing as it unfolded. The handwriting was as delicate as before, the words flowing in graceful loops. "My darling, I saw the sunset tonight and thought of the way you look when the light catches your hair. I wish I could have been there beside you. One day, I promise, I will walk up that path to your door and never have to say goodbye again." Claire felt her throat tighten. The voice in the letter was warm, tender, aching with love. It wasn't a casual romance. This was a connection that had been carved deep into the heart. Whoever had written these words had carried a devotion strong enough to pour it onto paper. Again and again, she continued reading. Some letters spoke of stolen meetings, a hand held in the shadows of the orchard, whispered laughter behind the barn, the brush of fingers as two people passed in the narrow hallway of a farmhouse. Others spoke of distance, of days measured in longing, of nights spent staring at the same moon and wondering if the other was doing the same. One letter, in particular, caught her off guard. It was dated in the spring of, "The war has kept us apart for too long. I don't know when I will see your face again, but I hold on to the sound of your voice in my mind. You once told me that love is like the roots of an old tree, unseen, but strong enough to hold against any storm. I believe that. I believe in us." Claire stared at the date, her mind racing. 1944. Her grandmother, Rose Whitmore, would have been barely 20 at the time. She had never spoken of the war years except in vague, practical terms. Yet here were these letters, brimming with a passion Claire had never imagined. Some envelopes were signed only with a single initial, J. Others ended without a name at all, as though even signing could be dangerous. There was an urgency in the writing, a sense that this love existed under the shadow of something. Perhaps distance, perhaps secrecy. Claire set the letters beside her for a moment, her gaze traveling over the barn. She tried to imagine her grandmother, as a young woman, standing where she now sat, perhaps holding these very same envelopes in her hands, her heart racing as she read them. Had Rose hidden them here to keep them safe from prying eyes, or had she tucked them away to forget, only to find that forgetting was impossible? She reached for another letter, this one written with a shaking hand, the ink smudged in places. "If I could, I would carry you away from all this. I would take you somewhere no one could find us. But until then, I will keep writing, because it's the only way I can be with you. Promise me you'll never stop reading my words, even if I am far away." Claire's chest ached as she folded the paper back into its envelope. She was beginning to feel the weight of these words, the kind of love that could anchor someone's soul for a lifetime. But she was also starting to sense there was more to this story, something unspoken that had shaped her family's past in ways she had never understood. Then, as she reached for the final letter in the bundle, her eyes froze on the date in the corner, the same week her grandmother had gotten married. The name mentioned inside was not her grandfather's. Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the letters replaying in her mind, like a film she couldn't switch off. Every line, every turn of phrase was etched in her thoughts, but it was that last one, the one written just days before her grandmother's wedding, that haunted her most. The words were tender, aching with longing, but they were also urgent. "Rose, my heart, I know you have been told what you must do, but promise me, even if you wear another man's ring, you will remember what we shared. The world may force us apart, but my love for you will not end." The letter was signed, not with a single initial, but with a full name, James Porter. Claire turned the name over in her mind. She didn't recognize it. In all the family stories, in every photo album, there had never been a James Porter. It was as if he'd been erased completely from their history. The next morning, Claire walked into town with a determination she hadn't felt in years. She knew exactly where she was going, to the small, ivy-covered house on Main Street, where Mrs. Evelyn lived. Evelyn had been her grandmother's closest friend, and at 94 was one of the last people who could remember the days Claire had just uncovered in those letters. Evelyn answered the door slowly, her face lighting up when she saw Claire. "Well, if it isn't Rose's granddaughter," she said warmly, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "What brings you by, dear?" I found something in the barn," Claire said, her voice low. "Letters. Old letters." At the mention of letters, Evelyn's expression shifted, a shadow crossing her features. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out one of the envelopes, offering it with both hands. Evelyn's frail fingers took it, and for a long moment, she simply stared at the handwriting. Her lips trembled before she whispered, "My God, it's been so many years. You know who wrote these, don't you?" Claire pressed gently. Evelyn nodded slowly. "James Porter," her voice cracked on the name. "Rose's first love." Claire felt her chest tighten. First love. But she never mentioned him. Not once. She wouldn't have. Evelyn replied softly, lowering herself into a chair and motioning for Claire to sit. James and Rose were inseparable before the war. Everyone thought they'd marry, but he was drafted in 43, and she waited for him, wrote him letters every week. Then, in 45, word came that James had been wounded. Badly. Communication was scarce, and there was talk he might not survive. Your great-grandfather, being the man he was, pressured Rose into marrying a neighbor's son. Your grandfather. It was all about the land, the farms, the family ties. Claire swallowed hard. So she didn't marry for love. She loved your grandfather in her own way, Evelyn said. But James was her soul's match. And when he finally came home, months later, it was too late. She was already married. They met one last time in that barn. And after that, they wrote, but only in secret. Claire imagined it. Her grandmother, a young bride, slipping away in the early morning to hide letters in a place where no one would find them. A lifetime of love, folded into envelopes, sealed away with dust and shadows. Why didn't she tell anyone? Claire asked quietly. Evelyn's eyes glistened. Because some love stories aren't meant to be spoken aloud. They're meant to be carried, quietly, fiercely. For as long as the heart will beat. Claire left Evelyn's house, with the letters pressed to her chest. She knew now that they weren't just pieces of paper. They were proof of a love that had defied time, distance, and even death. And as the wind rustled through the trees on her walk back, she felt a strange sense of urgency, as if the barn was calling her back for one final truth. The barn was quiet that afternoon, except for the creak of its old wooden beams in the wind. Claire stepped inside, the scent of hay and aged timber wrapping around her like a memory she didn't own. She walked toward the corner, where she had first found the letters, her boots crunching softly over the dusty floor. She knelt down, running her fingers along the floorboards, and something caught her eye. A narrow gap where the wood had splintered slightly. Carefully, she pried it open, with the edge of a rusted tool lying nearby. The board lifted with a groan, revealing a small tin box beneath. Her heart pounded. She reached in and pulled the box out, its metal cold against her palms. The lid resisted for a moment, before finally giving way with a sharp click. Inside, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, was a final letter, one she hadn't seen before. The paper was more delicate than the others, edges curled and yellowed with time. She unfolded it slowly, almost afraid that the words would vanish if she breathed too hard. My dearest Rose, if you are reading this, then it means I am gone, or perhaps the years have stolen my strength to reach you. I have loved you quietly, but fiercely, every day since we first met. Though the world kept us apart, you were the reason I woke each morning. When I am no longer here, promise me you will look at the stars on a clear night and think of me. I'll be looking back. It was signed simply, James. Claire's eyes burned. She could almost see him, a man standing under the night sky, holding her grandmother in his memory, as tightly as he had once held her hand. She sat there for a long time, the quiet of the barn wrapping around her like a blanket, her fingers brushing the loops of his faded handwriting. The sound of footsteps startled her. She turned to see her father standing in the doorway, his expression caught somewhere between curiosity and concern. What are you doing out here? He asked gently, stepping inside. Claire hesitated, before holding out the letter. Did you know? She asked. He took it, his eyes scanning the page. When he looked back at her, there was something new in his gaze. Softness, maybe even understanding. No, he said quietly. I didn't. But I think I understand her better now. Together, they stood in silence for a moment, the past stretching between them, like a bridge neither had crossed before. The following week, Claire decided to honor her grandmother in the only way that felt right. On a warm Sunday evening, she gathered the family in the barn. She set out the letters on an old wooden table, their paper glowing softly in the light of the lanterns she'd hung. As she read them aloud, the barn filled with the voice of a love that had never been silenced. each word a thread weaving the story back into the fabric of their family. No one spoke when she finished. There was only the sound of the wind slipping through the cracks in the walls, carrying the scent of hay and the weight of something sacred. Later that night, Claire walked out into the open field behind the barn. The sky above was a blanket of stars, brilliant and endless. She tilted her head back and closed her eyes. "I'm looking, James," she whispered. "I'm looking back." In that moment, she understood that love didn't need to be seen by the world to be real. Some love stories lived quietly, hidden in letters and memories, and sometimes that made them all the more eternal. And as she stood there, under the night sky, she felt certain that somewhere, her grandmother and James were standing together again, their hands intertwined, watching over the barn where their love had been kept safe for so many years.